Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode. I wanted to speak about an idea that I've approached as a kind of relationship between what the creature considers to exist and what the creature consists that is experientially real. And in some sense, what the wars of existential and experiential relativity are trying to the intention with the title is really that man is functioning as a self in a world, and that self, in some sense, the world of it can have different intensities. In the sense that your inner realms, for example, when a person is angry at the wrong person, they are experiencing a world where that person they're blaming is wrong. Do you see? That means as if they are too caught by the melody of their inner realms to pay attention to what could be valid externally or not. So when I say wars of existential and experiential relativity, even of just man's mind, looking at the concept of war, we see there are certain wars, and pretty much all wars have started from man's mind. And it's about how the human beings at the time chose to hold themselves in the moment. And it's very fascinating because we find ourselves in one common human design, but based on where you are born on the surface of the planet, you get your sense of cultural program and then your identity based on your environment and how the words that make it into language and started off with patterns of behavior that eventually needed a symbolism. Today I dived a bit deeper in my study of mythology. And so a question arose that I thought I'd share with the audience. These talks of mine, they're kind of like, how would I say, like moments where I share something that I find is helpful to humanity. Some of these ideas that I share, it doesn't mean all these ideas. I'm kind of just sharing my inner realms externally, externalizing my inner realms. Anyways, imagine two people, they decide to siege each other's kingdoms. That becomes an existential war. You know, that means the being's existence is changing as a consequence. But there are some wars where in our cultures, sometimes we have called them inner demons, sometimes we're called it victimhood from the past, sometimes we have called it some sort of resistance to the world. You see, and so experiential wars are wars that kind of are focused on the value of a sort of subject remaining, and an existential war is the value of the object. Now, I feel we have been a multidimensional species from the beginning, but we haven't had the ability to acknowledge it within ourselves. That means many linguistic professors say that there was meaning before language. What does that mean? That means like perhaps in the caveman time, one caveman wanted to get the attention of another caveman to look at something, and that caveman would just make noise, just try to move the winds of the limbs of speech as far as they could. You know, so what that means is when something has been important, the free will has maximized energy towards it. Excuse me. Now, the question that arose again, I gotta dive into this, is that is location a myth? That means, really, if we consider the universe changing, what is normal in a changing universe? Can someone please tell me? And someone would say, change, and I'd be like, nice, but how are you aware of that change? And you see, the only thing that is, I've considered our normality, is what we wake up the next day into that is still familiar. That means there's no such thing as normality, there's just collectively agreed upon familiarity. You know? That means it's not just like ancient teachings or only in Zen where there was an oral tradition. Pretty much human beings, the moment they began communicating, it was a moment where there was as if a hidden life found a way to step outside. That means it's kind of like, you can say, the evolution of limbs was stepping out of the cave. The evolution, or the oceanic cave, or we can and we can say the evolution of speech, the development of speech was stepping out of the inner cave, where for the first time the content of another human being's mind could, through the bridge of language, be shared with another human being. And as both human beings are in one moment, there's a new moment to it all. You see, there's always a space to the matter. There's always a mind to the moment. Now, the whole issue is not that there isn't intelligence on this planet. The issue is, how are we interpreting this intelligence? And if you, for example, ask the Stoics, and you imagine, and you were back in thought, but Epictetus, with Tetus, epic, the word epic, and then Tetus. And he has this very remarkable quote that I instantly committed to memory, and hopefully I can prove that right. He says, "We suffer, we suffer not from, we suffer not from the events in our lives, but from, how." Let me, guys, come on. This is gonna come to me. Just hang in there. We suffer not from the events in our lives, but on the judgments we have about them. There we go. But on the judgments we have about them. So it's another way of saying, like, we don't suffer just from existing. Every creature is existing. The whole natural program is that you're visiting this manifest reality for a certain time. And believe it or not, you take vacations every time you go to sleep from your conscious waking state, where all of civilization, glory, and meaning is found. It's as if the person, the guy, found it very difficult to wonder about the purpose of his life in deep sleep, because simply there was the absence of phenomenological meaning. It doesn't mean you don't exist in deep sleep. It just means the moment is like a glass orb under no surface, just hovering in space. And the mind of man, believe it or not, is like a glass orb, but this glass orb is a field. And one day there will come a day where it will be very common. Right now it's not common. It's like it's mysterious in 2020. Oh my God, is there an unknown field behind each of our minds that's the same? But that will become second nature. It literally, like the second nature. And so the Stoic path was more of a recognition that pretty much you can't do much with the outer program, and you can't do, not that you can't do much, you definitely have a free will over the vitality of your healthy survival in this plane of existence. But it's kind of like external phenomena is happening. That means it's like the child didn't build the roller coaster, but suddenly found himself in it. And it's kind of like we didn't build this existence, but we opened our eyes in it as an experiencer. Now I am starting to notice through my own, I can say self inquiry, that what I thought when I saw in the mirror was that I was an object. I felt that. I felt I was just that. That means this is why so much the whole cosmetic industry is booming, is simply because the beauty industry is booming, simply because people feel they are just what they see in the mirror. So they're only concerned, and perhaps you can say, not everybody, I'm just saying that just like people have an urge to be their appearance, only. And sometimes I wonder, in that case, when will the mind make an appearance? Some people I have spoken to, and it's as if literally I'm in like a Tetris game. Do you know? Like there's an artificiality to the communication because it's like the other person hasn't realized it's okay for existence to be. That is an ultimate, I can say, revelation. That's the one thing that kind of like releases the savageness of eons into an instant of serenity. And I feel this wallpaper I've chosen fits. It's in Greek mythology. There is, of course, the concept of sirens. Now, I don't think this lady is a mermaid. Like we can't prove that, but probably she isn't. If she isn't, she's in a battlefield. But there is something about the world having more authorization for different ways of being, and really, it's kind of like as time has pushed us forth, we have come more into a sensitivity to what our free will wants rather than what the world is being before our free will suddenly emerged as a subconscious simulation. So for me, it became fascinating. Again, I can't emphasize this enough, but this is one of those big questions that what is a myth? A myth is something that it was so far back and it's so unverifiable that it's just, and its design has value. Do you know the subjective, the conceptual design of the myth has a value? Many things, it's like many religions, the major events that led to them, the event has passed. We right now are not in the past. That means any person who is looking at a religion, there's no way you're looking at it like the ancients did. So, like the first man did. So it becomes a situation where man realizes his eyes are moving with the world. The world is like, I'm heading that way, and we're on the giant's shoulder, and we're like, okay, I guess we're heading that way. You know? For me, I feel we on some level have to live in the illusion, but at the same time strive for clarity. And let me tell you why. The illusion of the world provides emotional stability. The truth of the world provides intellectual precision. And these are forces that we find in civilization. That means you can go tell any scientist, I just want, I feel this is an important context to consider. Let's right now consider that there are incredible people known as scientists in the world trying to find exact results and trying to pretty much systemize the unknown of the cosmos. Now, these scientists have to be aware of one thing, though, that whatever the accuracy, regardless of the result of the experiment, result of the experiment is being brought to a society that each human being, due to our kind of neurochemical states, just our biology's chemistry, we are emotional creatures. That means we are not rational robots to just, in some sense, care for information about rationality. You see, I bow to rationality as if you must honor the king as it walks in the street, but at the same time, I do not forget the song of the sage in the mountains. And that was the thing. That was the thing. That was the way I kind of overcame a sort of war against language. That that the ally became the world. That nature protects itself. And once you realize you are it, what do you think happens then? You move with the rhythms of your conscious experience rather than unconsciously being pushed into, uh, you know, turbulent states of mind. This doesn't mean it's like check it out. The system is like a bunch of candles are lit for some time, right? And the way these candles burn for their world, for their moment, is a suggestion of the style and passion of the human being. You know, I was raised. I can say like I was the kind of I don't know. I was both from a religious context, a good boy, and also from a culturally whatever the environment wanted me to be. I listened. I was mischievous, but I'm telling you, there was a huge kind of follow the rules of the world you trust kind of program going on. And what changed was that I suddenly, history is like traveling for the mind. When you look at history, it's a luxury. History is a wealth. I'm telling you, it's just seeing. It's kind of like Google before Google. You know, it's like there were the history books passed the torch to the internet. You know, so suddenly this recognition that you are the definer of your inner space and the world is the definer of your outer space. When I think about external function, like functioning as in the conscious waking state as a biological being in a space time continuum, when I wonder about the most efficient way, I realize that if the external realms, everything I wanted should happen, then they would be my inner realms. So life is designed in a way where it's an advantage that the world doesn't give you everything you want. It's an advantage because it means the world has a mind of its own. It means the world is independent of you. When the world is independent of you, it's like, regardless of how many, George Carlin was making an excellent point here, that it's like, you know, okay, I'm playfully summarizing it, but it's like pretty much George Carlin was saying, do you think the earth cares you throw trash on it? Do you think the earth has remained longer than us? We are. The reason we're freaking about the earth is not that the earth, this rock is going to be around much longer than we are in our stories. But the thing is, that it's how what we it's our symbiosis with our own environments that have now come in the domains of our free will, where once they were just in the jungle, now it's in the concrete jungle because man God became conscious and made concrete. But he's still an animal, so it's like jungle like psychology going on in like just concrete, you know, that's made over jungle. Sorry guys, I'm listening to this incredible soundtrack in the back while I'm giving this talk, and I suddenly had this idea of writing a comment on the video in case I would forget the comment. But anyways, pretty much, guys, we were animals. I look at my ancestors and I'm suddenly like honored, honored, honored. Then when I go really far back, I'm like, wait a minute, we're animals. We're all animals. And then you realize that something, and which I consider to be the rhythm of a field. I consider the mind not to be standing around like a person, you know? The mind is a field. The mind is, believe it or not, the watcher of time. This is why Plato says time is the moving image of eternity. That means really there's no way of fathoming eternity, or you can even consider it if the realm is temporary. That means it's strange. It's kind of like in a dark room you can't imagine the light. In complete pure light you can't imagine the darkness. You know, and it's kind of like when you're a temporary biological being, you can't imagine, you can't give a shape to eternity, but it doesn't mean the field is not there. Mostly we see a field of intelligence arises, and then from that field, particles move. Now, we are particles that have arose from a field, let's call it a field, let's say the Elysium, the hidden Elysium that is the inner earth. I feel every human being or every DNA emerges with potential. This is very common. Like imagine right now you were this next level instrument designer and you just built for the future generations, built thousands of instruments, you know, millions of instruments. And then in that moment, you suddenly realize every instrument that you've made, now you've given to the future generations. So the future generations are opening their eyes, equipped with some genetical knowledge. Their DNA harbors behavioral knowledge. Okay? Genetical memory, pretty much. They've tested it in rats. You can imagine its complexity in human beings, but they've tested it in rats. And it's like the rats that were afraid, and then they reproduced. The next generation of rats had that fear in it. So pretty much how you are, and this is a very important idea, guys, but I think the act of sex, in the intentions the man and the woman have in that instant, is like the emergence of a sort of, it's like a linking. I don't know how to say it, but it's like the intention you have before the thought sets the whole thing in motion. It's kind of like how you get on the surfboard suggests your stability to ride through the waves. And so in life, there is moments of chaos, which is another way of saying unfair, and there are moments of order, which is another way of saying there's fair moments. Now, on some level, there is external judgment. You could be the most deserving kind of employee in an institution, and suddenly someone else, the boss's son is for example, imagine like you see this in movies, like the boss's son is ahead of you. So what does that mean? That means a huge issue with corporate culture is the proper allocation of skill to the right problem, you know? And life, when its temporary dimensions intensify, it really becomes one of, how can I tell you? It's kind of like Beethoven's last words on this earth, on his deathbed. He said, "Applaud, my friends, the comedy is over." And what he meant is that the simulation that has been enduring endlessly through light and darkness comes to completion. So you see, it's like, some beings, you call them eternal, they would get offended. They're like, what's wrong with the temporary? There's some beings you talk about spirituality, and they are, in some sense, they're like, I don't drink that tea. Another good brand of tea, guys, is emptiness. The empty, try empty tea. Imagine a tea company, and you see their logo on the cover of the box, empty. Tea like you've never seen before. And then you buy the tea, you go home, you open the package, and there's nothing there, and it's empty. And they stay true to their company personality. Pretty much a tea company that's in the box business. So, anyways, guys, the question of how the inner realm is being a location is a good one to ask, because mythology is not just inspiring stories or stories that stretch. They're kind of like, the mythology is the stepping stone to the ultimatum of a collective field that has no personality. So what that means is, like, just like how an archetype, or let's say an egoic a construct that's bound to a certain archetype, that's possessed by a certain archetype. The concept of even the religious concept of possession, it meant an invisible personality is moving a visible phenomena, right? So the invisible personality was another way of saying it's the archetype that influences behavior. And what the archetype is actually not an invisible personality. Here's the deep question. I can say one of the deepest questions in philosophy, that when man considers what another being is, how can he know that he is not generating the value he sees in that being? So what that means is, it's like maybe you looked at something when you were young and you never thought about it, and now that image is there as a sort of unchecked kind of fact. So there's many of these dormant kind of ways that when one kind of becomes conscious of their memory fields, then you no longer kind of try to, it's kind of like how hilariously Alan Watts said in Zen, there was a saying like, or it's like with a crowbar trying to make the ripples on a pond settle by slamming the crowbar to the pond. Like, Alan Watts is really epic. But so that's the thing, that the constant continuity of attention on a certain form is actually the archetypal influence. So you can say a person doesn't forget possession from other dimensions. Many people are possessed by their past. Many people are the victims of experiences that they felt their free will couldn't do anything in. But the free will, the whole point of it is novelty. That the new is the forgiveness. This is why those human beings in life that are just forgiving by nature, they are actually the urge to be loud. It's just that that loudness is just kept in their inner realms. And I feel we are in such a unique point in our history, and I feel there will come the multidimensional renaissance. And this multidimensional renaissance is, you can say, Mr. Around the space of the new. Do you know, like when your moment feels like a portal where one side is known, the other is, it just becomes access to, you can say, at first habitual inner realms, and then once you move beyond an identity sort of relationship with yourself, you abide by your presence, then your mind is actually kind of being conscious that life is not just the filtration of sensory perception. That the way the sensory perception is being processed is occurring from the witness of a grander dimension, like an onion style multidimensionality. That means as if we are in a concentric sphere that is the witness, that is the whole moment, and then there's the contents in this concentric sphere as another smaller concentric circle, and it's kind of like we're pretty much an object encapsulated in a spherical object, encapsulated in a spherical subject, encapsulated in an attributeless witnessing sphere. And that sphere I have in my writing, especially was one of the early books I wrote. There were two books that I wrote that are unpublished. One of them is called The Inventor's Sphere, and the other is called The Ancient Listeners. And I wrote these two books at the same time, you know? I would just go in the park and I pretty much would just like write one chapter of that, to write one chapter of the other, one right chapter of this, one right chapter of the other. And the inventor sphere is this whole idea that there is a sphere that once accessed, it is the endless source. It is the ancient legend of the Akashic records, the Akash, the memory of the gods that the human mind, once recognizing its divine position, can access. You know? I feel that because we're individually conscious beings, because right now our individualism is the center of our conscious meaning, we have to advance where the attention of the individual is and the freedom. That means imagine right now you were, let's say, they took, okay, here, this is how I feel any business and company or any system, any project the person runs in anything can get fixed by this one principle. Where if the project, let's say you have a certain funding, funds, and you start a business. Now, this business is literally like the money going into the business is firewood, and the business's existence is the flames. Okay? Now, one wonders, where is this light going? So in any system, any project, you just have to look at the simplest principles, the simplest factors that are keeping the institution alive, and in some sense wonder where the attention is and where the problem is. I am telling you, they should create a course in all educational systems, and they should call it attention studies, where children are first and enter through questions. You don't understand. A question, you learn more from a question than an answer, I feel personally. A question opens potential for other worlds, an answer closes the box of reality. So if we consider the human nature to be dynamic, there's a huge potential that the meaning of life can never be answered, because the question is the meaning. The wonder to pursue is the meaning. And human beings have to trust human activity. There's no way it can become advanced. A system only becomes advanced when the user of the technology trusts the technology. So if human beings don't trust their external experience, don't trust their civilization, don't trust the leadership of the information that's being moving around in cyclones in society. Right now, I can say information is more entertaining. That means watching stuff is more entertaining than doing stuff. because it's simpler and there's more. So you can say, how can I tell you? It's like society is being pushed into its head, and there should be constant efforts to bring it out of its head. And there was this ancient esoteric idea, even in, you can say a branch of this would be Mahasamadhi. But another branch, the way I'm saying it, it was this ancient esoteric idea that the being should not be, it should not move the body from inside it. And some people are like, yo, what does that mean? And what it meant was that you are like out of your body, but not as like some ghost. You are the whole moment, and the body is found in the attention. So you are out of body in the way that your body is found in your attention. So you are like as if space. You are this. Your soul is stretching its existence in space first, then moving matter. You can say there are fields of free will. I feel there was, what was it? There was like, let's say, let's consider this statement, keep your eyes in check. And let's just look at that statement as if in check with what? Do you see how phenomenal the question is? Where we are looking at sight as if it's a bunch of elements on a table, and we're like, okay, let's see how these elements behave, and then coming to conclusions that, wait a minute, we are an involvement with the moment. How could the moment just be the moment? How can man see something that his eyes don't influence by the nature of the light entering? And it's a mystery for me. I don't know how people are just super calm. We're like on a rocket in the middle of nowhere. Something I was remember one night, it made me laugh so hard, where it's literally I had to stop laughing so my physical body wouldn't get too disturbed, and I was just in my mind in the silent kind of smiling kind of view, and I was laughing at, in some sense, at how so many of us think we see each other, and we actually see the world. And I feel the path of knowledge should be a journey climbed down a mountain as a unit. I remember in my kind of major work I call the Civilization 2.0, I saw that children are in some sense joining into groups of, I call them elemental units. So for me, you see, right now, war is something that's bad. Okay, and when it starts, there's going to come one time where we're going to be, okay, it's too stupid doing this. There could be a smarter route. It's kind of like Isaac Asimov says, violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. That means when someone knows they're going to lose, they go all out. And when you see savage violence in the streets, that means that person hasn't found a simpler, gentler way to handle the moment. That means they're not even aware of life. And it's kind of cause and effect, because the more it's like the more being people are like just an object to you. It reaches a sort of savageness. It reaches a savageness where it's like the person justifies just from their inner realms what everything the outer realms is. That's racism. It's not just racism, it's ethnocentrism, which we all are kind of emerging from our own bubbles of what is valid as life. But it's kind of like, this is where the human beings have to be conscious of how mighty the inner realms of every being could be. There could be a child in Africa right now, in those commercials they show constantly, where that child is in poverty, and most people are looking at that child and they're in some sense kind of like, oh, crying for the starvation of the child. I saw that commercial, and even though it brought me to tears seeing the physical condition of human beings, but it also brought me to a tear because that child could be the next Einstein, and look at how we're treating our own species. It's like there was. This is why I strangely, when I look at what was the archaic for me, the concept of royalty and a sort of the concept of a king for me is not a tyrant. Just like in history, there were ignorant kings, there were also enlightened kings. But these kings realized that then the king was the will of the universal sector. It wasn't one man wanting to be like, you know. You see, a tyrant treats reality as a virtual simulation. So you can say it's like violence is a sign of a person trapped in a virtual reality of their own belief system. And we have to start giving space. You see, it's like literally in a crowded room, nobody can work properly. But when there's enough space, this was even Buckminster Fuller's kind of vision of the perfect room, that it was like half of a sphere. That means we right now are existing in boxes and like cubicles. This is nonsense. Buckminster Fuller gave us a better route, and it was like this kind of spherical dome shape, because he was like, whoever's working in that environment will suddenly feel it's all going to a center. They will suddenly feel it's like the sky. For me, there is pretty much right now, the camera lens has been built. We are the zoom in and zoom out of it. That's the free will. That's the whole Stoic kind of joy, where you realize that if your mind is creating you, what is creating your mind? And that's when Mr. Within would say, welcome to your unknown presence. This is the ultimate abidance. Until the universal sector begins to speak. So there was a figure in Tibetan Buddhism, his name was Guru Padmasambhava. I would say he goes down as one of the most badass people in history. Guru Padmasambhava was a realized being. And if he had a Facebook status or Facebook about section, it would say at the age of 8, manifested from a lotus at the center of the pond at the 8-year-old, and started teaching the water spirits, and then a king comes and adopts him. That's that kid's childhood right there. Guru Padmasambhava's childhood is like intense. So Guru Padmasambhava, he was this very realized being, and he did something that very few beings in history have done, or it has been documented that they have done. He was this realized sage that suddenly, out of nowhere one night, imagine he's living with a community with a certain amount of people, he suddenly gets a vision where he has to walk somewhere. So he suddenly goes on a journey. And suddenly it's as if there are stories where Guru Padmasambhava, right when people are going to call for his help, he's already arrived. It's some next level, like inner intuitive telepathic GPS field of being. But Guru Padmasambhava, so he was a traveler who would go around, and there were irrigation problems, not from just the technology, but from the balance of heaven and earth in the moment. So Guru Padmasambhava would go to different villages that had problems with weather, what's the term? Like their rivers dried up or something, and he would, as attribute, the ancient archaic mind would attribute that it was a being. There was some multidimensional interference with the nature of the physical dimension. So Guru Padmasambhava, he was such a badass that he would go and banish these beings from these areas and convert them to Buddhism. He would convert beings in other dimensions to Buddhism. I was like, whoa, I was like, it doesn't get more mystical than that, I mean, it definitely does, but like, and Guru Padmasambhava even has this story where he was in his, like, I don't know, like late 20s, and he's traveling. There's a story that he gets banished from the kingdom because he drops this dagger and it falls on the counts like the king who had adopted him, it falls on his like, king fathers. How can I tell you? He pretty much drops a dagger and kills the son of like the counselor of the king, and the king's like, "Why'd you do it?" And he was like, "I released him from his karma, like a sickness would come to him or something." Like it was on like some mystical answer. And then he was exiled. He was like, they were like, he's like, "There's no way you can remain here after doing that and saying that." And so and the story is that as he's going on his kind of travels on his journey, Guru Padmasambhava suddenly sees there's this incredibly beautiful woman and she's crying beside a river. Just tears are pouring, and her tears, even poetically, are falling into the river, you know. And so Guru Padmasambhava goes and they have a conversation and they're speaking, and after a little while the girl is laughing and there's a spy. There's a spy, and in how the story unfolds is that the girl is a princess. And the spy sees this and runs to the king with that super fast speed and says, "King, there's a random guy talking to your, daughter." And the king's like, "What is this? Bring him here. We're gonna make an example out of him." And so, as the princess has suddenly kind of opened her mind has opened by speaking to Guru Padmasambhava, suddenly the chaotic appears. And the guards come and take Guru Padmasambhava and the princess, and they suddenly see all the townspeople have come, like these bored townspeople with the mob mentality just being the best activity they could do for their kind of savage survival conditions. And so, as these people or townspeople have come, the king says, "Let this be a warning." And let me say this before, the princess suddenly knows what's going on. She knows her father and she knows what's going on, and she's like, "Oh my God." And she runs to her father and screams and says, "Don't," like something intense, like in a movie. And Guru Padmasambhava, he's just present, he's just watching, And the king says, "Let this be a message to anyone who comes near my daughter." This is what happens to you. And he says, "Set the fires." And before he can tell Guru Padmasambhava that burn him, before he goes, he does that savage king kind of, behavioralism. It's like before he acts like King Joffrey, Guru Padmasambhava is just staring at the princess and just smiles, strange smile. And before the king says it, he already knows how the moment is going to happen, and he just walks. He just walks to the firewood where the flames are, where the firewood is, and then they set the firewood, and the king's like, "Okay," and the firewood starts burning, and the people are like, "Yeah, burn this person. We have no clue who he is. Burn this random person who doesn't even live in our village." You know what the mob mentality wants, guys. Rats just want cheese. So in that moment, suddenly something strange happens. The princess is in tears. The king is in wrathful laughter. And the mob mentality is just hungry for just something to evolve in the moment. Suddenly, the savage roars of the ignorant human dimension, just pretty much the mob suddenly starts gasping. Everyone's like, "Oh my God, what is this? Oh my God." Suddenly there's this shock that hits everyone when they see Guru Padmasambhava is untouched. There isn't even ash on him. It's as if the flames didn't touch him. It's as if nature needed his work for a bit longer. So Guru Padmasambhava stood in the flames of ignorance, and he remained present. That's like that story is really the what the advancement of the human being into an advanced civilization. That fear not how the world is speaking. Your voice is here too. For too long, silence. Silence is like a coach kind of telling every person's imagination and inner realms, all right, go do something, be creative. It's like, the world is creative, so everybody is, believe it or not. Nature is defined by its next step, and our eyes are that next step so far. I could totally see how Beethoven was a being who he mastered the external realms, and then due to the nature of his walk of life and his, you can say, he studied his outer realms, then he studied his inner realms. And when he studied his inner realms, he realized that inner realms is really conceptual freedom in regards to free will, right? That means life is not like a painting. It's like a film. It's like a dynamic moving phenomenon where the unknown factors in it kind of are the pillars and foundations of the excitement and the knowledge. It's kind of like Tolkien being a 14-year-old kid under a table in the UK while it's being bombed, and suddenly beside him is standing Frodo, and suddenly Gandalf calls him up from the mirror and from the table, and it's like suddenly a moment where his inner realms evoked an actuality. You see, some people's inner realms, it's based on the resistance you have to life and how much you are still in the proximity of your own decency. Okay, there has been times where I have used communication indecently, especially before 2011. I would say, like, if I kind of, if who I am now saw you and you wanted to go through a time machine and see who I was in 2011, I would tell you don't. Because the way I would communicate was still had a sort of ignorance to what was out there, really. It's like sometimes when you really want something from the world, you don't get to see the world. You kind of have a blind eye to everything else other than what you want out of the moment. So I feel an advanced civilization will eventually change. So that means, think of it this way, that the concept of advance means that something is expanding in a sophisticated way. It means progress in all dimensions of that intelligent system. It means when we speak about an advancement of a civilization, that could be a totally an advancement on a level where the concept of the civilization, even what a civilization means, changes. It's like we don't have to be afraid of having new ideas even on ourselves. The whole pursuit of knowledge is that we're again on a rock in the middle of nowhere, and it is the eyes of man that are steering the world into motion. And there was something, I don't know, guys, serene about this wallpaper. Like, this is a good thing, I guess, for the audience engagement component of this. So, I wonder, like, what do the viewers, how would they put the emotion they feel when they see this picture on the wallpaper uh, into a statement, and share that in the chat section if you can. I want to know your a kind of like. I hope that was clear, guys. I don't know. There are some questions that pull you towards, I can say, an ultimate dimension of meaning, where the person is tired of the constant repetition and they're trying to find a resolution that kind of translates as an unconditional state through all conditions of life. For some people, the allure of the concept of moksha, nirvana, enlightenment was to attain a state that is unconditional to the cause and effect of whatever this world displays. You know? So it's kind of like, I find the Avengers movie kind of did a great job in showing how human gods can be. And that's another way of saying how familiar higher dimensions can be. I'm trying to see how I would kind of word my emotional response to this picture. The ultimate redemption of the blindly innocent. Yeah. By the way, guys, sometimes these live streams are kind of loose, so people can share if they want me to speak about a certain thing. They can. You feel free to kind of like add a direction as a visitor to the live stream. You know. But anyways, pretty much we look at human behavior. We look at the self, we see the world. We look at the world, we see the self. Eventually, we see a watcher, regardless of which came first. That presence is the source of all creativity, and it's another way of saying zero doesn't have the value because it is space. So I would permit that the dictionary, they just put the number zero as a definition for space. As if in mathematical language, that's the closest symbol we came to. The value of phenomena is so fascinating, guys, because the same way you can look at an object from different angles, like you could walk around the object, like you imagine, like I remember I was in Milan, Italy, and there was the statue of Leonardo da Vinci. And I remember I walked around that statue. And I'm like, how poetic that the doves on the statue had no idea who this man was. And neither, like they didn't even need to. I had a phenomenal experience, guys, in Milan, Italy. I was sitting, so I was kind of like traveling from different cities in Milan. And I'm not Italian. I was just traveling as like, a kind of tourist attempting life beyond the Shire. And I had this moment where I had my phone and I filmed it. And it was this scene where I was sitting, I picked up my phone. The moment I turned my hand slowly at a certain pace, there was all the doves on the ground suddenly started walking towards me as if strangely the moment the camera moved, the doves all moved towards it's the speed of my hand motion, right? I think what it was is that maybe like old people fed the doves, so the slow hand motion made the doves feel like your food's coming. But there was a unique moment where I kind of saw that Leonardo da Vinci, his advancements, his greater contributions were in his, you can say, unique study of the deeper dimensions of the being. Stretching from his sketches from how inside the human body looked to a sort of polymath mind with that in various fields and dimensions he could apply his intelligence, but at the same time, as if his left hemisphere and right brain hemisphere were kind of very well tuned to how the frontal lobe instructed. So it became like he was a very kind of complex human being, you know. And I have no idea too much about Da Vinci's history really, but I know like his contributions. Just like you can see a statue from different viewpoints, you can see a subject from different viewpoints, and you can see how you are considering yourself as a subject, and there can literally be endless angles to this, endless spiraling angles. I'm not joking. Every way you have perceived yourself in every moment of your life, in that very moment, you could have perceived yourself in another way. Sometimes that's what forgiveness is, the authorization of a more efficient parallel dimension. And it's kind of like this kind of view where it's like, how can the person ask for forgiveness from others when they can't even give it to themselves? It's kind of in kind of the honor of the spirit of the warrior that there has to be one being who walks first into the darkness with the lantern. And that's the thing, it's like in Lord of the Rings, I think it was one of the most, even though, like, of course, it's a legendary film, Lord of the Rings. They took so many years to make it. It's like, I definitely broke so many records. But there was a scene where you see, like, the king, what's his name? Uh, Aragorn or something. Like, you see that king who is so kind of bonded to his kingdom, to his birthright, on a subconscious level. In that moment, he's like, there's no speech. He just runs, or maybe he says for our friends or something, and he's like, he runs into the last battle of you, like that messed up battle before, like, I don't know, somehow the ground cracks. Who knew throwing a ring in lava, would cause earthquakes? Who knew? But the scene was that the king in that situation, or whatever, just whoever the guy was, like he ran towards the unknown alone, and that's the strength that I feel the greatest writers in history, you know, they were touched by this vision of the solo quest. That nobody has your eyes, so its mysteries are yours to explore. You see, nobody can study really your mind, you know? That's kind of like we're designed that way to not see what's in each other's heads unless we communicate until language becomes a bridge between the inner realms. But the thing is that we are not what changes that we're observing. So if you are a conscious being and you are observing, you know, change, it's strangely, you're like the changeless memory of change. It's like how you remember various memories in your life. It's like, isn't that so uniquely fascinating? In one moment, various senses of self are accessible, various memories are accessible, various, even the person can have a sort of visualization. The more I feel you trust life, the more into your intelligence, your natural intelligence emerges. That natural intelligence doesn't mean some unique thing, or if you were a yogi hearing this, like a siddhi or something. It means you are noticing that you are part of the nature of this world. And nature, the way it's designed, is that it is a potential set forth, it gives a display, and then returns. And for a long time, my question, I think it was in 2015, if someone would ask me, I would say, I would feel that this world is a simulation for the laughter of the gods that we can never conceive, we can never fathom. So I was under this impression that it's like, why a temporary display? Why would God even make what do you call it? A temporary dimension? Why would nature? Why would nature, for me, it's one of the deepest mysteries, how from the mineral kingdom there came the design of legs and limbs. You know, it's as if like you look at nature, it's like going at a certain pace and a program, and then suddenly you see the evolution of the human being, and you're like, what is this? It's like, when were we touched by gods, and why don't we remember this? You know? And really, reality is kind of like a coin flip of intelligence, isn't it? It's either all a field, like we're all drops in an ocean, or we're all separate particles hovering in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's like various interpretations can be had. It's just like we're evolving into the more advanced modalities of our own intelligence. You can say people, their intelligence, the reason it can't be measured, I think the person who came up with the IQ test had really low IQ, guys, because that person felt that intelligence is measurable. How can you measure a river? Who can measure the edge of the sky? Some things are boundless in their force. And the inner realms, a person can conduct an inner life that this was the unique thing, that I thought I was just the life of my body. And it was as if only in certain believed conditions that body would be enjoyed, would suddenly feel the bliss. And then I suddenly came to a point where I'm like, okay, who is believing? Who am I to believe? Do I know who I am to even believe something to be true? Who am I? So when that question, when the most savage or intense questions that the person may ask others, you ask your own self. Before you ask a question from someone, you ask that question from yourself. It becomes a sort of inner depth acknowledgement. In one of my science fiction writings, I kind of had this concept where I called, I don't remember the exact name, but it was, I think a drug called Dante, something like that. And I'd written this kind of very abstract, kind of like science fiction kind of novel, but not too far into science fiction, maybe like 50 to 70 years in the future, where there had come this drug, where this drug was called Dante's Inferno, and it was this kind of chemically but still organic kind of drug that had been made, that this drug In some sense, when the person took it, there was a 50-50 chance that they would experience, like in Dante's Inferno, the literature, the 7 levels of hell and the 7 levels of heaven. Do you know? First of all, the vision, it seems that the idea, the imagery of hell came from Dante's Inferno, really, primarily. It was like, it was like re-pushed. It was pushed by, let me tell you, it's as if there's no saying if higher dimensions have image. Man is a creature of image for now. So you see, that's another distinction between the different hallways of the different schools of thought there is for this. Some people feel that the unknown is nothing. Some people feel the unknown is everything. Some people feel the cause can be known. Some people feel the cause is unknown. Some people feel the effect can be known. Some people feel the effect is unknown. And there's various models of human activity going on this planet. We're pretty much all programs on the screen, on the green screen of future generations. So I feel the way actually time travel, there's going to be an incredible boost in that research towards time travel through cyberspace culture. That means we're going to first travel through times of worlds we built and try to find similar parallels in regards to real-time travel. But there is also this argument that you can't enter the past without changing it. So that means there's no way, even if we build a time travel machine conceptually, like there's no authorization. We exist, and when we dream, we experience. We're pretty much the experiencer creating existence. When we wake up, we're existence creating the experience. That means what you eat influences your psychology. What you see influences your psychology. What you breathe influences your psychology. What you care for influences your psychology, and that's the biggest factor. That at some point decency is a reversion to the need to be savage for the world to be in order. Sometimes when I look at violence, I'm like, that's a weird thing. Because you see, there's this archetype that sometimes power becomes ruthless. And that's kind of, you see it, that any person who suddenly thinks, like they say this for many scholars fall into this trap, that the reason many scholars don't have a sort of efficient social life is because they are considering who they are to be something different. But in reality, the differences are all projections. That means, imagine, we everyone who's listening to this talk, we're all in the park, and suddenly someone comes and to, let's say you who are listening, suddenly says you're a bad person in front of all of us. And then suddenly another person comes and says you're a good person. And then another person comes and says you're a bad person. And then another person comes and says, and this never ends. And so it's as if we are trying to scientifically be moral, and our rulers are breaking in the process. I feel it is one of the joys of the mind to figure it out, to see that sometimes the problem is complex, but who says the answer isn't simple? Why wouldn't the answer be simple? All complexity seems to arise from simpler principles, simpler movements. That means if you pay attention in these talks, how can I tell you? It's kind of, you can say the orator has to project his own freedom before he can even speak. That means I have to fight for my own inner freedom before I can express myself properly in an outer. Anytime my inner realms are moving too much and suddenly I'm disturbed by the outer realms, then it becomes a sort of, how can I tell you? It's like, there's a pace to things, you know? The jaguar and the bird move at different speeds and different elevations. Like a jaguar runs really fast compared to, let's say, a pigeon, how fast the pigeon can fly. But the pigeon has access to three-dimensional movement, like three-dimensional space, more access than its body, and the jaguar is just on a two-dimensional field. I always had this vision in my youth that in the future, in my house, I'm gonna have a room and it's gonna be an anti-gravity room. It's gonna be a room where at the end of the day, after work, I can just come and just jump into that room and just hover in the air. Because you see, even if a person sleeps, there's still pressure of body on matter, right? So it's like I feel the best mattress is one where we're just hovering in the air, kind of sleeping, you know? So, I don't know what, the bed industry is doing, but get your attention on anti-gravity, That's the healthiest bed. Space. And the mind is familiar with space. You as a person may think that in this life, you can give yourself any sort of mask, any sense of judgment. You may think you're identified with a certain familiarity, a certain pattern. Maybe it's a lesser pattern, maybe it's a higher pattern. Maybe it's a unknown pattern. Maybe you're a person who there's no one has ever seen anyone like you. You know? And that means that your DNA has a value because nobody knows what you like. Most people, it's like, believe it or not, the word greatness equals potential, and that potential equals the vision, and the vision equals what's there. And really, what's there depends on the trust that spontaneity, kind of the instant has. You know. So, good evening, guys. Welcome. I mean, it's pretty much morning here in Toronto, Canada. I think, just to finish the point I was making, regardless of who you think you are in this moment or any moment, if there is the unknown, there is evolution. That means the rational way out of fear is that there's something here that can do something. And it's like the human beings prayed to the gods, and suddenly a voice came from the heaven. And it's like, do it yourself. And they're like, what did God say? God said, do it yourself. It's like, okay. It was like I'm telling you, it's after some point, the poetry of your inner realms can be very extensive. I have had moments where I can say I have my attention has been overloaded. So what does that mean? That means I was in a sort of unique state. And in that state, I was kind of like walking, and I don't know how to say it, but it was as if I just had to sit down and cover literally any time I feel I'm having a too much rush. My inner realms are moving too fast. This is something I've kind of instinctually kind of do, is that I put my palm on my forehead. Anytime there's ignorance in a room, it's as if like you're covering your inner realms from projecting into the space in a strange way, right? And it could be just a sensational thing. That means I'm just saying, like, it has a sort of this thing of putting your hand on your palm. There isn't a mystery to it. It's just like it helps just holding your head, with your palm being on your forehead. Like that helps sometimes, to give you balance and stillness, you know. And I remember there was such a download, or you can say rush, as if like a valve had opened and the cup was again filled to the brim and beyond. And in that moment, I realized, okay, I'm seeing to more than I can do anything about in my inner realms. And so after some point, you have to stop the archetype. When life gets too heavy in your inner realms, you get out of the archetype. That means if I was giving this talk and suddenly there was an intense situation, literally the situation would become heavy to a point where I would have to step out of the role. I would step out of kind of like the rhythm of the speech, you know. So requires the unreal to exist. I find, instead of us thinking that we're pure materialistic creatures and banishing the imagination from realism too early, we must kind of study it, okay? Something that's a mystery you study pretty much before kind of defining too solidly, you know. Energy is conscious of itself and it can direct itself. That is the grandeur of human life. That is I think, the major point of it. That you are potential for phenomena to occur, and your inner realms are like, after 4 billion years, you are like a unique color that the civilization that can paint itself with. You know, it's like, really, when you look at the concept of a civilization, it has to do with its members. Like, imagine you attempted to rate which gyms in the world are like the best gyms, you know, workout gyms. So you would go and see the members of those gyms, and how the gym is treating the members. Now imagine civilization. Every society has a gym membership, and that gym membership is being conducted in a civilization that for now is in the sleeping giant phase. That means it's kind of like, the weakness doesn't exist. It's like we're all just sleeping giants. You know, and really what that means is, once fear is reverse engineered to its source, there is an instant of attention prior to any dualistic story. That's instantaneity of attention. Is, you can say, you can call it your cosmic presence, universal presence. You can go poetically wild, but what it is it is isness itself. It is existence before non-existence. That's the eternal presence, or I would say the pure lands that Tibetan Buddhism spoke about. That's when you have walked into the pure lands. It's not a physical walk. It's a state of mind that has cared for the nature of reality, that it has allowed itself to attain. When you care for something, you allow yourself to look at it. When you care for people, you know, sometimes you have to care for people more than they care for themselves, because they are a reflection of your species. That means it'd be that moment where it's as if like, you're kind of like with your friend and there's alien contact being made on a massive level, you know? And in that sense, you're like, yo, you know, you look at your friend and you're like, hey man, the aliens are coming. Let's look good as the human species, you know? So that's what I'm saying. Like it's a sort of eventually once you see we all are actually united by the language of our simple natural design. What we have in common is not just what we don't know. It is how we are a sort of species. That should be the only symbol on a flag. I feel like the best flag is it should be a completely pitch black flag, okay? And then there's going to be, in some sense, that on the picture of the flag, if there was a overall flag to a united humanity, I'm thinking that flag should be exactly draw the solar system, okay? And then it's going to draw a couple circles around Earth, and that's it, you know? Or I would say instead of Earth, it would be a yin yang symbol. I think that would be a kind of nice, I don't know, interesting flag. Actually, guys, I'm going to attempt to draw this, and one day you'll see it. There's this really, honestly, guys, this is one of the, I think, the essence, like humor is born from this story, I think. And there's this man who's kind of bewildered. He has to get to the other side of the river. It's a Zen story. He has to get to the other side of the Zen story. And so this man is running. He's running on the side and he's like, there's no bridge, there's no bridge. It's driving him insane. And then he sees on the other side, there's still no bridge, but there's an old sage that's just meditating on a rock. And this sage is so old that his eyebrows are like curtains. And when this guy says, Sage, old sage, how do I get to the other side of the river? He shouts it. As if he has no choice, he shouts it. And that moment, the old sage, kind of as if like moving, Shakespeare's stages kind of curtains, he moves his eyebrows. And he looks at the guy and he suddenly takes a deep breath and he shouts back and he says, you are on the other side. And that's the end of the story, guys. The guy, it's kind of like you're trying to get to heaven while you're on earth, and suddenly you realize earth is in heaven. We are all playfully, the imagination of God, our potential at least. And what I mean by that is that the concept of God is literally equivalent to the absolute unknown. That means it is an idea that when the scientist, or the astronomer wonders about a black hole and wonders how there's an event horizon that light literally is being pulled at such an intensity that you can't. It's like you vanish or you dissolve or I don't know what. Like you. I don't know, in a strange photogenetic way are erased. It's as if like you've entered an intensity that your free will's intensity can no longer do anything about. So imagine an astronaut being like, oh no, oh no. It's like, oh no, black hole, holy shit. And the moment, imagine there is this theory that inside the black hole could be another universe. There is this theory that perhaps the moment the astronaut goes through that black hole, suddenly they find themselves in the other side, a portal. Maybe it's a portal that looks black. But anyways, so it's like this event horizon is a level of kind of thought where the mystery is in there. We can't see any further. And when in the 6th century, when human beings saw that they were a person and looked at the cosmos and suddenly said, "What if?" It's all an evolution of communication. I can tell you that life is not made of just matter, and it's not just made of symbol attribution and subjectivity. Life is communication of worlds. There are worlds behind our eyes. Did you not know? There are lives being lived behind our eyes. Did you not know? And it's kind of like looking at this wallpaper, and this is a messed up situation. You know, I feel this warrior is unfairly being pushed out of existence. But you see, it's as if there's a sort of, you see her, the illustrator is incredible. I don't know who the illustrator is, but like, this is an incredible picture the more you look at it. And you see, it's as if her eyes are like, what now, but then breathing the grace of the fields of Elysium, something like that. Where it's as if the inner realms are free from the mortal coil. And no longer there is it's as if it's that moment where the white, kind of endlessly long dragon and the black endlessly white dragon were like spiraling around one another. And eventually they reached a point where they no longer, it was as if yin yang had fulfilled its purpose. And we were like, all right, yin and yang, you guys can go home. And and the species was no longer caught in just a dualistic framework of language. It's like, I feel we need to draw cardboards, cardboard signs, free yin and yang, free free human beings from dualistic morality that is making them act like digital beasts. Binary is really human morality, is it not? Good and bad, 0 1 0 1 0 1. What is this? What is this? Are we really robots in disguise? It's not just the Transformers. Human beings are also, their psychology is digitally kind of appearing too much. Yeah. Our inner realms, I feel, are designed to actually externalize. I feel our sense of self is really an awareness to a moment where the sensory perception is transforming like a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly. I believe it or not, I feel conscious living is literally life just conscious. And all activity is just a little intensification of attention, you know? So it's like, I hope everyone who's listening to these talks, you buy a notebook and you kind of write in it like, okay, journal of my own mind, or journal of the contents of my mind, or whatever. Write it as the journal of the ultimate mystery, and suddenly begin wondering how your mind, because you look at this life, really there's design. The whole thing about class distinction is all about different design. The whole thing about different technologies and their success and failure, everything in this life is designed. When you realize that we're actually starting as designers, and then stories of emotion is coming. So it's kind of like this pure level of clarity, that man can't act really like a robot, but has an ability to perceive the depth of the robotic vision. So you see, it's kind of like we're reaching a point where first they asked, is the spirit in the machine? Now where suddenly people are like, oh my God, is the world a simulation? And, and it's like, is there 1 billionth chance this world is a simulation? And it's as if the spirit is, the machine is in the spirit. That's the unknown. That's knowledge realizing it's hovering in the unknown. If that means if one day, I don't have kids, but if I had a kid, and my kid came up to me, it's like, why is everything here? I'd be like, ask the unknown. And that would be a moment where suddenly the human being realizes there is experience, or the ability of the presence of experience to be the direct source of data without a sort of linguistic constant translation in a parallel subjective dimension to everything. So for me, I found a way to kind of separate how I had kind of how I was spoon fed language and communication by my environment, pretty much what I was exposed to as a being throughout the day. When you care for your mind, that means the mind is not a physical object, and it's not a subject, because the person subjectively, they have various views on themselves. So maybe, like, you have looked through so many different eyes of different versions of yourself till however old you are. It's just, that's the point of life. It's like every day we are sculpting our momentum, at least, towards a direction. So, anyways, guys, I've reached the end of this talk. I was kind of inspired by Terence McKenna's thing, to kind of like, Terence McKenna said something like, I kind of realized why this guy was so intelligent, because he cared for the eyes of the world. And so it was like this thing where, how can I tell you? It's like, right now, on some level, I perceive every human being, or every intelligent human being, as a moment of observing intelligence, that if the person considers their mind as being their whole moment, their body, they can't just be their body if they are their mind. If you're your body, you can't be the space of your mind. But because you have awareness, and this awareness is a sort of reception, or let's say an antenna that's extracting sensory perception into patterns of thought or language or image. So it's kind of like, by the nature of being alive, the world is being alive. And this life eventually will reach a point where, either through the notion of infinity, either through the gate of infinity, or through the gate of the singular and the void, you will find this. So that means that we don't think every mystic is the same. There are some mystics that, for example, they get the same view, but they get it through the reverse absence. And what that means is, like, the same way you can be super still and silent and realize the nature of reality, you can also be super, I call it the advanced communicator. We shouldn't fear communication in our authentic stride towards it, towards advanced communication. Suddenly imagine we stopped thinking of measurements too firmly, and we were like, every person has a mind. And this mind is the potential of their vision's implementation or externalization. And it's very easy that if you think you're just a materialistic being, to not care for anything. Did you know? Did you know it's so easy to break something, you know? So guys, if there's any questions, I'm accessible right now. If not, then I shall start ambitiously, marching towards my bed. Really, in life, I feel that I gotta share this concept. You gotta build your own fire. This is an incredible concept. It is so crucial for the educational system's transformation. Build your own fire means that every human being has access to a vision, a landscape of reality and its values and meaning. So right now, just like the same way someone can say, look at your space, just look around you and see where you are. That's like a physical view that's there. You don't have to even think about it. You're there. Reality, you don't have to think about it because you're in it, right? But then you see, how would I term it? Sometimes the great joy of life is when your eyes move before your sense of self. And when that happens, experience is silent. The more a person becomes still and silent, the more like you become aware of your mind that's moving. The more you suddenly, how can I say it, communicate too much, then you suddenly are in a space where you're like an audience of your, how can I say it? Guys, one one story I'm gonna share, where the story is a bit savage, but it was told to me by my uncle. I was like 15 when I heard this story. It's a ridiculous story, but there's a very profound moral to it that I think is the solution to, that is the instant solution to the eradication of all depression statistics. So when I say depression, I mean like that concept is like one viewpoint of it. Another view is self-resistance. And what are you resisting in the moment that is causing a tension that's eventually becoming a chaos to the ordered system that you're choosing to rhythmically abide by? Okay. So this story, there's a man. He's standing on a rooftop. His name is Bob. Let's call him Bob. Okay. Bob is standing on a rooftop. And he's having a cigarette. He's having a smoke. Or whatever nature has bestowed the earth. Suddenly, he hears someone from the street shout. Sorry guys, I messed up the story. Totally messed up the story. Anyways, I'll just say it again. Okay. Let's say this is the parallel dimension of my first attempt at the story. There's a guy, having a smoke. He's looking outside the rooftop, okay? And he suddenly, there's this man who shouts, let's say this building, this relatively tall building, someone from the street shouts, Bob, Bob, and he just goes and he's looking, and then the guy shouts, Bob, your wife and kids have passed away. They're gone, man, they're dead. And it's this savage moment. The guy says it with such emotion and tears that he doesn't even know what to do. And so this man suddenly, he feels his hand tremble and the cigarette fall from his hand. And he looks at the kind of edge of he's on the rooftop and he falls. He lets himself go. He's like, they're gone. And he falls. And as he's falling, he's just remembering all those moments. And for a second, a question arises to him. And he's like, as he's falling, he's like, wait a minute, when did I have a kid? I'm pretty sure I didn't have a kid. I didn't have a son. I didn't have, kids. And then as he's falling, suddenly he realizes he's getting closer to the ground. He realizes, he's like, wait a minute, I never got married. And right when he's about to fall, he's like, oh my God, I'm not Bob. And then, the story crashes. So the story, let me tell you why it helps eradicate stress statistics worldwide. Because it means the self that is suffering is not the only self. It means you're not the inefficient view when in every moment you can be the efficient one. And guys, I don't know why, I think the universe was like, all right, Amin's atheist uncle, go tell him the story when he's like 15. But I don't know, guys, that's the cool thing about nature, really. That it just happens before we can really define it. That's really kind of like the playfulness in poetry, It's like at some point you read out some poetic hymn that's so beautiful and divine and there's tears in your eyes, but then suddenly this divine laughter finds you, you're like, what if this guy's full of shit? And what I mean by that is that the mind chooses its level of trust. Really nothing, no object or subject has a nature. You are animating your moment by your being. And now that being has filters in regards to being kept dormant in the inner realm. So when you realize that it's okay to perceive things multidimensionally, that's where hope lives. Hope lives in a multidimensional universe. That's the only way it can stay in the building of existence. I don't know, guys. I kind of, on some level, see that nature is a program. I can't, a lot of my science fiction was inspired by many things I saw in nature that I could see a robot doing. I could totally see us being able to create trees. You know? You know, there was a saying. Right now I feel I should go into a quote tunnel. Sorry guys, before I end off. I feel I should kind of share quotes from a certain person in the history of our species. And he is really, for some strange reason in this lifetime, very coincidental. I had a privilege of when I went to India and Rishikesh for a couple of months, my ashram was the ashram beside that ashram. And it's called the Divine Life Society. So his name was Swami Shivananda. Shivananda Saraswati. Swami Shivananda. And he was this doctor, believe it or not, doctor, suddenly kind of getting enlightened by his own midlife crisis, you know. And he suddenly went on levels of compassion that are like, I'm going to tell you, like, I'm going to read you his quotes, but there's incredible stories about him too, about how selfless his divinity was, and that's why it was there. Because the self had realized like the individual activity, as the medics would say, it has become inseparable with the cosmic activity. So that as above, so below is both actually the one moment, you know? So, anyways, let's see what Swami Shivananda has to say. Swami Shivananda says meditation is the dissolution of thoughts in eternal awareness or pure consciousness without objectification, knowing without thinking, merging finitude in infinity. Swami Shivananda says there's something good in all seeming failures. You're not to see that now. Time will reveal it. Be patient. Swami Shivananda says, do not brood over your past mistakes and failures, as this will only fill your mind with grief, regret, and depression. Do not repeat them in the future. Yeah, so that means don't contaminate your future with the inefficient views of your past, whatever they are. You know? Swami Shivananda says, terrible is the fight put up by the senses. Fight bravely, conquer them you must. Intense words from a monk, but very deep. Swami Shivananda says there's no end of craving, hence contentment alone is the best way to happiness. Therefore acquire contentment. Yeah, guys, because that's the only thing you can do. What else can you do? You know, contentment is a strange authorization of the inner realms. Swami Shivananda says, if you do not know the laws of right conduct, you cannot form your character. He says, as a desire arises in the mind, it is satisfied immediately, another comes. It is satisfied immediately, another comes. In the interval which separates two desires, a perfect calm reigns in the mind. So in the interval which separates two desires, a perfect calm reigns in the mind. It is at this moment freed from all thought, love or hate. Complete peace equally reigns between two mental waves. And that's another way of you being the witness of heaven and earth, or another way of saying your chaotic self and your ordered self, which each have their kind of relative world. So the world of your ordered self is heaven, the world of your chaotic self is like hell. And Swami Shivananda is saying something incredible here, as if like the space between the different desires of different selves, as if what you desired when you were young and what you desire now, and the awareness to both of them in the moment is that equally, as he says, reigning kind of complete peace. Swami Shivananda says complete peace equally reigns between two mental waves, which is pretty much the end of that same last sentence. Swami Shivananda says, forget like child any injury done by somebody immediately. Never keep it in the heart. It kindles hatred. That means inefficiency, don't let it linger. Again, guys. What it means, inefficiency means, for example, like the result of that pattern wasn't efficient. Now, sometimes you can say desires can be deeply rooted, and therefore there requires to be an emotional release before there could be even a psychological release. And that emotional release could be a very hard, complex algorithm. If, for example, a clinical psychologist was looking at a bewildered mind and trying to wonder how much of that bewilderment is because of what they've gone through and how much of it is really from them. And so it's kind of like scanning the mind is an impossible task, yet its attempt contributes to at least the database of like how far things can go. Swami Shivananda says a mountain is composed of tiny grains of earth. The ocean is made up of tiny drops of water. Even so, life is but an endless series of little details, actions, speeches, and thoughts. And the consequences, whether good or bad, or even the least of them, are far-reaching. An endless series of little details, actions, speeches, and thoughts. That means it's micro occurrences. We're like the bubbles at the edge of a kettle. No reason why we should be there, but we're here as a design, and we're here for a little while. It's like when your life becomes a performance, you can't avoid the cosmic audience. So your lifetime is like a performance, not in front of just reality, but in front of your own vision and its edges. Swami Shivananda says, today is your own. Tomorrow, perchance, may never come. Swami Shivananda says, moral values and a culture and a religion maintaining these values are far better than laws and regulations. So he's saying like inner values are more important to pay attention to than just artificial outer values. Swami Shivananda says arbitrary outer values. Swami Shivananda says your duty is to treat everybody with love as a manifestation of the Lord. Okay, that's definitely something to write on a resume. It's like, what are your values? You gotta emanate as the source of truth, man. No, but I can totally understand. What he means is you gotta trust the universal will, where your free will is simultaneously occurring in regards to a symbiosis with the unknown living rhythmic phenomena. Swami Shivananda says, practice meditation regularly. Meditation leads to eternal bliss, therefore meditate. He says meditation is painful in the beginning, but it bestows immortal bliss and supreme joy in that. Guys, I agree with the ending of this statement, but the beginning is meditation is painful only if you're sitting on like an uncomfortable rock. Because really, it's not a pain thing. The body is just still and silent and the mind moves. It's the association to the mind through indecent and insincere ways that causes inner turmoil. That means sometimes you may totally be sad about ideas that are really ideas that can never actually be you. So there's as much as a person can look at a situation and see the destructive angle. You can also look at it and see a creative angle, the constructive angle. The constructive angle means that, okay, let's walk through the addition sign first before the subtraction sign. And that's the thing, that's the advantage of human life. It's here for a little while and then it lifts off. Swami Shivananda says humility is not cowardice, meekness is not weakness. Humility and meekness are indeed spiritual powers. Swami Shivananda says always do good to others. Be selfless, mentally remove everything and be free. This is divine life. This is the direct way to moksha or salvation. So Swami Shivananda's algorithm is like mentally Be selfless. That means literally there's no self that can have an opinion on itself. And then he says mentally remove everything. That means at whatever free will there is, whether individually conscious or collectively conscious, he's saying mentally remove everything. That means the free will attempts to look at the free, attempts to care for the update, the internal update. And that's a sort of how you're living. Again, I say it's like that metaphor, that kind of, I don't know, legendary image that the world is on the back of a giant turtle. And that means the world is alive. So it means that your success in this life is not just based on your relationship with yourself, with others, and with your ecosystem, but it has to do also with your relationship with the simplest presence of life. That means when you can care for an ant, when you're at that level where there's no, when you see an insect, you just escort it out of the building like a, or escort it out of the nightclub like a bouncer. You see, it's like when it's a sort of Janus sensitivity to phenomenology, natural phenomenology. And this sensitivity means that the potential of the design, it's as if we're not saying we just want to care for animals because they're living beings. We're also saying we want to care for beings, like we like the reason we don't want animals to go extinct is because we want to see the advancement of design. That means it's like the cosmos is empty space, we're in it, and we're like, what do we want to see here? Right? And it's like our ability to allow ourselves to naturally evolve. I call this an evolutionary return to nature. It's pretty much one of those ideas that an essay turned into a book and a book turned into a library. Swami Shivananda says, do not love leisure. Waste not a minute, be bold, realize the truth here and now. He says, Swami Shivananda says, the harder the struggle, the more glorious the triumph. Self-realization demands very great struggle. Swami Shivananda says the real spiritual progress of the aspirant is measured by the extent to which he achieves inner tranquility. Inner tranquility means that if somebody asks you what your opinion is on yourself, there's no opinion. You're just being the self. You see the simplicity of it. That means many things that appeared that we looked at Leonardo da Vinci and we were like, oh my God, how's he doing this complex thing? Like drawing with one hand and writing with one hand. Like I feel children in the educational system should be forced to attempt this, you know? Yeah. Let's get both hemispheres of motion. But what if, when people ask Da Vinci, how do you do it? Da Vinci's response was simplicity is the most ultimate sophistication. It's simple. Sometimes from the simplest moments, the complex vision appears. You might not believe it, because belief can't take you anywhere. Belief just is a mask on a changing world. Why wear a mask when we're trying to, like, the glory of life, the adventure of it is to find your real face, right? That means I feel that it's like human beings, if you ask, this is the thing that's not cleared up, that if you ask what is the purpose, like when you really look at, if you were, like, for example, we had an aerial view of the human species, we like, let's say we were kind of like a galactic anthropologist, okay? We were a galactic being, playfully, let's say, that were like, we were studying, like, primitive alien civilizations, you know? And we came and saw the human being, and we're what are these creatures? What are they doing? Where's their attention going? How aware are they to their environment? How aware are they that they are their environment? How aware are they that the whole reality is in a void? What is their solution and strategies to the world that they see? How much are they aware that the world that they see is not just a simulated linguistic illusion, but is actually having an efficient movement with the reality of things? You know, for me, now is a time where it's as if we are breaking the doors of conception. You know, it's a very interesting time because it is what many scholars such as Aldous Huxley, Terence McKenna set in motion in Western culture. Because Western culture separated was a kind of, it became conscious quick in a certain way, and you can say there was a separation of church and state. In some countries in this world, there isn't a separation from church and state, and in some countries in the world are kind of like how, what was it, like Louis XIV, where he said, "I am the state." They asked him, "How are you running things?" He's like, "I am." It's like, it's kind of like a movie, you know. It's like, "What is this nation, king?" And the king's like, "I am the nation." There's an incredible French word for it. I don't know, but I remember like the le part. So you see that separation of what the past is saying the world is and how you're actually experiencing the world and how the world could be. It's as if it is three infinity symbols that are intersecting. They are the propellers that inspire the pilot of consciousness. Anyways, guys, I hope this talk was helpful. What can we say? Like the concept of the phoenix in Seymour in Persian mythology, the Seymour was a being that had lived through three ends of worlds, like three apocalypses. The phoenix was this legendary wise. That's why the phoenix was wise, a symbol of a sort of an ultimate archetype of wisdom, because it had resurrected, you know, through a length of time where its knowledge was purely experiential. So the moment we become immortal, schools are unnecessary. Somehow, let's say in the future, we find a way to keep the biological body going in the most healthy and incredible way, you know, that would be a suggestion. Let's say like the movie Elysium or something. I don't know what to say, guys. There's at some point I have found a way where everything I have said can translate geometrically for me. I can literally hear someone speak or sing or anything, and the sound can instantly appear as geometry, not just words, not just images, not just inner events. I believe it was kind of in Hegel's work where he spoke about how man was like there's inner objects, that the contents of the mind are objects of an internal realm of access of the being. It's like, I think this was the thing. The seeker, the truth seeker, asked The Mahatma, why this? And the answer came because the universe is not done breathing yet. In the inhalation of the gods in ancient Vedic thought, you might not believe it, but we are kinda the mind of a god, where 3 days of that god is like, I don't know, trillions of years of our experience as creatures. Like, you can totally say there's an extraterrestrial glow to Vedic mythology, and even you can even say to Greek mythology, to many mythologies. There's a sort of like human beings had nothing else to give an image to it, but they saw something of the unknown. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste.